This meeting is being recorded.
Well, good morning and welcome once again to our 18th annual Sharpen the Saw Day, Day 3. My name is Peter Parts. I'm a Class 4 graduate and one of the volunteers who helps with this really cool event. And today I'm broadcasting live from the EMBA classroom here at RIT. For those that haven't been to RIT in a while and are coming in person tomorrow, you are in for a treat. You're going to really like the new digs. We're hoping that the two previous speakers from Monday and Tuesday gave you lots of helpful and truly useful material to think about and to use. We have a great hour planned for you today. We're going to talk about Web3, DAOs, and money. Put your seatbelt on and let's get started. We're introducing the gentleman from Foundry Digital. Krista Vardabash is the Business Development Manager for Executive Education here at Saunders. Krista, you've been a big help for this whole event, and the floor is yours, Krista.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to make this really quick. We've got today two gentlemen from Foundry Digital, Lucas Kohorst and Matt Burke. Lucas is Protocol and Investment Engineer, and Matt Burke is Product Manager from Foundry Digital. Foundry Digital here in Rochester, they empower Bitcoin miners with the tools needed today to build tomorrow's decentralized infrastructure. And Foundry is growing at an incredible rate. Only 10 employees at the end of 2019, and today 110. And I happen to know they're growing because they were actually they were at a RIT career fair just the other day, last week. So really looking forward to their presentation today. Just to keep Ukraine in our minds and our hearts, their presentation is Web3 and DAOs, Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. And just to keep Ukraine in our minds as well, if you don't know what DAOs are, think about this. Ukraine, a DAO for Ukraine has received 57 million in cryptocurrency, largely by through DAOs. So this has an incredible influence and has a power to really influence business going forward. So their presentation today is going to give us an idea of just exactly how that works. We may not have a lot of time for question and answer because we are shifting to our second speaker today right at 12:30, but put your questions in the chat and we'll make sure that they get answered. So I don't want to take any more time. I'm going to turn it over to Lucas and Matt. Thanks for being here and welcome to Sharpen the Saw.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro, guys. Okay, cool. Let me just share my screen quickly. And as mentioned, yeah, we're really looking forward to any questions. So feel free to just drop those in the chat, and then we'll try and get to them.
I also tried to leave a bit of time at the end to ask questions. So
yeah, cool. Yeah, sweet. So our presentation is going to be on Web3 DAOs and their impact to businesses, but then as well as their impact to employees, and kind of how a lot of jobs are kind of shifting. And then real quick, we already had like an intro to our company, but Foundry is focusing on Bitcoin mining as well as proof of stake, which may be unfamiliar to a lot of you. But it's the core infrastructure that powers various blockchains and cryptocurrencies. To date, we've deployed like over $400 million into investing in the infrastructure. We have the largest Bitcoin mining pool in the world, and we're quickly approaching $1 billion staked with our partnered institutions. Okay, cool. So real quick, you probably have seen like a lot of headlines across like Forbes and Fortune and the Times and such about the future of work, Web3, DAOs.
No.
Sorry. Yeah, so you've probably seen a lot of these headlines, and you may not know exactly what to make of them. And we'll kind of go into the intro points for those in the following slides, but just like some quick highlights.
Hey, Lucas, sorry to interrupt. Does anyone else only see white on the screen?
Yeah, it's showing blank on our end.
I do.
Oh, really? Okay.
Do you want to try to reshare your screen?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
It might be because if sometimes, Lucas, if you make the presentation like full presentation mode and share the screen, as opposed to like just your browser, that might be part of it.
Oh, really? Okay. 1 second.
Perfect.
Okay, you can see that now?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay, cool. Well, here's the first slide and the second slide, and then the third slide with the headlines. So I'll just kind of continue from there. So yeah, we've probably seen some of the headlines about how like Web3 is the future of work, and kind of how DAOs are leading the charge and impacting that, as well as like how DAOs kind of impact the creator economy. And then on the legislation front, DAOs are actually now legally recognized as a like form of an LLC in Wyoming, which is pretty cool. So a few DAOs have started actually legally registering there, which is great because then they can get access to like normal business benefits, but they can still kind of operate in this decentralized fashion. As well as like kind of on the back of COVID's you know, like great resignation, there's been like follow-up articles on like Fortune and Forbes that mentioned that a lot of like top FANG employees are kind of migrating into crypto Web3 to either build startups or go and work for DAOs, which is pretty interesting. We'll kind of get into points later on why an employee might want to leave to go and work at a DAO or within a crypto company. So first, at kind of like a high level, what is Web3? Well, initially we had Web 1, which was just like basic email and basic HTML, you know, kind of like the early 90s and such, right? And then Web 2 is kind of what really initially started where you'd see like the massive explosion with the internet, right? So this is like companies like Twitter and Facebook, Instagram, Google, where everything is very information centric. A lot of the content becomes curated and indexed by Google, and people can all of a sudden start interacting with like dynamic content and stuff like that, which is really great. However, what has been focused on is kind of the separation between the users and into large companies, and that's where like Google and you know, really any of these like top FANG companies have really started to just absolutely print money, right? Which is great for them, but a lot of this control can be handed back to the users, and this is kind of what Web3 focuses on: user control, user access, privacy, with a few other points. So when you're kind of operating in a Web3 world, like let's say we had Web3 Twitter. All of your tweets, posts, and likes would be data owned by you. So there wouldn't be a single company that kind of owns it, can control it, can delete it at will. Instead, you own it yourself, host it, and then you're purely just using this Web3 Twitter as a platform for hosting your data, and kind of as a way to like aggregate what you store, right? So that's obviously great from a privacy standpoint. And it's very much so user focused, where all the users actually own the content on the platform rather than having a single company own it, right? Additionally, Web3 is highly composable. So a lot of Web3 is built on top of blockchains, a similar technology to where cryptocurrencies are built on. But Web3 is really more so built on the chains, with the idea of like building platforms and websites in mind rather than cryptocurrencies. However, since they're all built on similar chains, you can kind of think about them as having like open APIs, right? So in a traditional company context, like let's take like Twitter, they have to open their API for other companies to use, and they have to have it documented. In the blockchain context, since everyone's building with the same technology, all APIs are open and public by default and already documented, which means if I have a Web3 version of Twitter, all of my tweets, likes, and like settings can actually just be ported into a different UI, a different front end, even a different app. Like there's, if I wanted to kind of like easily like drag over my followers or those that I'm following from Twitter to Facebook, that would just be super seamless and easy, right? Right now, I'm sure there's applications that let you do this, but they have to interface with the custom APIs that Twitter and Facebook provide, rather than kind of just using the base chain blockchain, right?
And this is a very important point, contrasting and juxtaposing Web 2 and Web 3. So let's say, well, in that example of Lucas, he creates a Twitter for his, he creates his own Twitter that is more open source. Well, that code that hosts the API is something that I can view, that you can view, anyone on this call can view, anyone in the world can view, because it's all hosted publicly. And say there's this one little feature of Lucas's Twitter that I don't like. Well, I don't have to, that I want to improve upon. In Web 2 with Twitter, I would have to write to the developers at Twitter and say, hey, can you add this feature? My voice is going to get drowned out in the voice of a million other requests that they're getting for feature upgrades. Whereas in Web 3, how it works is I can do what's called fork the code. I basically copy and paste the code. I change a few things, and now all of a sudden I have my own version of this Web 3 Twitter. And so that's the open source aspect of it that is very important, that it doesn't currently exist in any sort of meaningful way in the current state. To use a more like business-oriented example, I've worked with a number of CRM, customer relationship management tools, Salesforce, HubSpot, and although these tools are great in certain respects, it's often a huge pain in the neck to try to integrate other tools into those tools, because Salesforce they don't want to talk nicely with HubSpot because HubSpot's a competitor. Even though, I just acquired a company that uses HubSpot that has but we use Salesforce, so we need to integrate our tooling. Well, what Web3 does from a business efficiency standpoint is it really helps to optimize a lot of those things.
Hey, Matt, would you say, I guess Lucas too, would you say that that's the essence of decentralization, when the term decentralization is kind of thrown around and we've heard so much of, is that the essence of decentralization?
So I think it's hard to boil decentralization down in essence. I think that is certainly a part of it, this composability, this user ownership aspect of it. I also think a large part of it is it's a defense against attack vectors. So for example, if your business, essential to your business, let's just say Salesforce. Salesforce is absolutely essential to your business as a customer relationship management tool. Well, let's say there's a targeted attack on Salesforce. Well, their API goes down, their site goes down for any given period of time. That means, your purchase orders are going to be behind. That means that all your automated emails, your marketing campaigns are going to be affected. There's a number of cascading effects. Whereas in Web 3, like look at a Web 3 version of Salesforce, it's not to say attacks don't happen, attacks certainly do happen. But if they do happen, someone can, what we call it, spin up, or they can fork this technology, they can create a new one. All of your data is ported over. And also then, because it's open source, you get tap into like the wisdom of the crowds, so to speak, and you're able to, and the wisdom of the crowd is able to improve that technology to protect against that attack vector. Whereas, you might have to pay in a Web 2 context, you might have to pay a cybersecurity firm millions and millions of dollars in order to protect against these attack vectors. Whereas in Web 3, because the users help to own they own the content and the platform itself, they're incentivized to improve upon it as well. Lucas, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, not entirely, but like kind of like as a wrap up point for this Web3 slide. I think we'll kind of get into this a little bit later, but an important like shift to notice is that as you begin returning a lot of this like ownership and privacy and control back to users, a lot of that there's like a pretty like decent shift away from like an actual company into that company's products, right? So all of a sudden, rather than focusing on the company that makes the software, all you're concerned about is the actual software and what it does, right? Which is kind of where it starts getting interesting from a business perspective. But I think Matt will get to that a little bit later. And then just because we just kind of quickly mentioned it, we have an entire slide here on kind of like decentralization and why it's important. So Matt briefly just touched on kind of like defining decentralization, and it's kind of hard to define, right? There's kind of a lot of different facets of it. You know, in the context of the software and these various like Web3 protocols that could be built, right? Obviously being able to fork the code, spin it up with a different front end, and have like multiple hosting sites for a given protocol that aren't all owned by the same individual, but instead can be run and operated by anybody with their own data is very important. And that kind of gets into the fourth bullet point on something being hard to shut down or restrict, right? And I think probably like the easiest parallel to understand decentralization is that when people are, you know, often talking about like Bitcoin or various cryptocurrencies, they mention that it's very it's much needed to have a decentralized form of like sovereign currency that isn't the United States dollar, right? That can just be blocked or the government can kind of do what they want with it at any point, right? And those are all fair points. And I don't want to like divert this talk too much from Web3 and DAOs into crypto, but if you just take that concept of not having a central party to control something and then port it over into the software that can be built and empowered through Web3, I think that's a pretty good parallel in understanding for why decentralization is important. Matt, any other points on that?
Oh, that's great.
Cool. So yeah, so then, you know, the next few slides here are kind of going to go into the specifics of what does like working for a Web3 company look like from an employee's point of view, and then like why would, or you know, what does like a Web3/DAO implementation of an actual company look like?
So yeah, so this idea of DAO is relatively new. So decentralized autonomous organization. You know, if we break it apart, decentralized is really it's sort of these themes that we've been talking about in terms of it's a distributed workforce. The technologies are hosted on decentralized platforms. And let's look at the autonomous part. So the autonomous part is very interesting because this is what has been enabled through technology, through the emergence of technologies like blockchain, wherein you know, if a company, say like traditional Web2 company, forms and then disbands, that company is effectively, you know, it effectively is dissolved. Now in Web3, what that looks like, because it is all on code or on chain or on the, you know, living on the blockchain, a lot of this is autonomous and it can effectively run without, you know, without the leaders. And if you follow autonomy in a code context through to its logical conclusion, you know, it can live independent of any individuals operating it, so long as the code is hosted. Now, like I've mentioned, it's we're in the very, very early days of what these DAO things are. So we're still trying to, like, you know, there's no, you can look online and for every 5 people that you read who are quote unquote DAO experts, you're going to hear 10 different definitions, which is obviously lack of definition is an indication that it's, a concept is still very new or a commonly understood definition. But there are some common themes. So for example, this idea of token weighted voting. So things like technologies like Ethereum, there are technologies built on top of it that are run as DAOs. And so what that looks like, let's just say Lucas and I started this, you know, the Salesforce, the CRM DAO. And let's follow that example of this attack vector came and okay, now all of a sudden we need to make a critical improvement to our DAO. Instead of Lucas and I saying, you know, as the CEOs saying, okay, company, do this, you know, this is more of like the traditional sort of like, it's more traditional hierarchy. It goes to a vote. And obviously those who are token holders in the community have ownership and in the community, and they have a vested interest in the success of the project. And so instead of us saying, do this, it would go to a vote and a proposal. And those who vote, this voting generally happens on the blockchain itself. So, and that's in an effort of promoting transparency. And, you know, it's not, well, and basically being tamper proof. So, you know, there aren't like necessarily shady things going on behind closed doors and, you know, tampering with votes. Now, and then based on, say, Lucas and I, as the leaders of this DAO, say we really want this, we really want to improve this security attack vector. Well, for whatever reason, let's say that the community doesn't want to, they want to improve, they want to focus on some other feature. Well, if Lucas and I, we don't have a majority voting, we don't have a majority token holding, therefore that vote won't go through. So despite being the quote unquote leaders, our say is only as, it only carries as much weight as our token shares. And so this point about, but this brings us to the next point. So about not many being truly decentralized. Right now, a lot of these DAOs are run behind the scenes. They're basically run. They're incorporated like traditional companies, and sometimes that actually makes the most sense. So it is people, like the Lucas and I in this scenario. We're calling the shots behind the scenes, and DAO is more of like a branding thing. And quite frankly, I've seen people, DAO founders who are bringing people into the DAO space effectively to try to get free work. They put DAO at the end of their project name, and they get contributors that want to come in, but they don't pay them or anything like that. So in that sense, we're still working on what does this true decentralization look like, and what is the value add relative to more traditional corporate structures. And this idea of, but this tapping into this wisdom of the crowds sort of leads to this next idea of flexible and ideal for fast moving projects. Oftentimes, in more of a traditional corporate structure, the board has to say there's a strategic decision that has to be made, then it has to be presented to the board has to approve it. There has to be proper budget allocations. Those budget allocations then has to filter down throughout the rest of the organization. There has to be consensus and buy-in across, the key stakeholders across the organization. Where in the DAO world, if something goes to a vote and the proposal passes, then you can execute upon it very rapidly, which is immensely important in the software world, in the space that we're living in right now, given how quickly innovation is happening. The longer that it takes to execute on a strategic decision, from a strategic standpoint, from a market differentiation standpoint, that's you're losing time, and in effect, you're losing the ability to capture market share. So that's another benefit of them. As Lucas mentioned, so this idea of project and product focused having carrying greater weight over company focus. So it's like I say, so the members of the DAO are there to build and create a product. They're very, very output focused, as opposed to, and so they're I guess, so Lucas has a developer background, Lucas could work for multiple DAOs as opposed to just working for one company doing a single focus as at the company as a developer. So Lucas could utilize his skill sets as a developer across, let's just say a dozen DAOs doing something very similar. And so in that sense, he is working more like he identifies more as a developer around his skill set versus the company itself. And then obviously, we're living in an increasingly remote world. So the move is, and a lot of this work can be done remotely at the computer. So that's that next point. Luke, you want to go on to the next slide here?
Yep.
So yeah, following on that thread, so this idea of working with a DAO. So this idea of extreme hyper specialization, that's especially where we are right now. You can think about it more like function focused. So general management at this point in time. So for example, in the DAO world, developers are much more sought after. They'll get, they get much better compensation compared to someone who has someone like myself. Although I have a product background, I have more of a general management type skill. So I don't have as many hard skills, which at the current state in the DAO world, are very seeking after these hard skills. The shift to being self-employed, so someone can have a stream of income from disparate DAOs, so long as they're meeting their daily needs. They can pay their rent, they can buy food, put food on the table. They can do this working across having multiple different income streams. So this idea of sort of the office being Discord and the industry meeting on Twitter. So Discord is it's like a chat tool. It's similar to something like Slack or Microsoft Teams, which is that's where a lot of these DAOs, because people are meeting across the world, across time zones. That's where they're meeting to discuss, and a lot of the thought leadership is being posted on Twitter. Work being hyper remote. Again, this is something that we're trending more toward, especially in the wake of COVID. And so, you don't necessarily got to be, and working from 9 to 5. It's more of, it's outcomes oriented. Are we shipping this product? Say my peak energy is at 1 o'clock in the morning. Great. If you get your work done, that's awesome. We don't care when you work or how you do it. We just want it to get done. Some of the big, and this is where the DAO world is really starting to. Some of the problems that I have to work through now is, there's, aside from the work itself, there are a number of benefits of working obviously with a company. So things like, just like health benefits, 401ks. So how do we implement those things in this in this Web3 space? There are companies out there that are working on these problems, but they are very, very new. Yeah, and so what does this mean for business? In some ways, this is a short list. However, there are a number of things. So in a modern business, part of it is the employees. They are basically, what this means besides being core members. So these are the core team that actually stood up this DAO, this protocol. They are more like contractors. It's like working like freelancers. That's why you can work across 10, 12, 15 different DAOs. As DAO operators or business owners, you need to be okay with your employees working across different time zones, working across different geographies, working in different times of the day. However, depending on what the outcome is and what the objective is, it does allow for, in certain cases, it does make more sense because it allows companies to move faster, to iterate more quickly, to find that competitive edge, to find that niche within the industry. And as Lucas mentioned earlier, so we are seeing a shift more from a company orientation to more of a product orientation. But what we're also seeing with it, and this is again the very new days, is so we're seeing these new and emergent models of ownership and governance. So what does it mean to work with people where you have equity in the company by nature of simply contributing to it, and you can contribute on your own terms and your own time. And so how do we navigate through that in terms of making decisions, in terms of governing ourselves in our operations? And then finally, from a business standpoint, obviously we're always concerned about the legal and regulatory landscape. Right now, that is very, very unclear what that looks like. Are these tokens securities? Are they commodities? Like how are these governing bodies going to ultimately say what these tokens are? What is my exposure as a DAO contributor to limited liability? We're starting to see more clarity through things like Lucas had mentioned, like the Wyoming DAO LLC being formed, Marshall Islands, recently announced the ability to form DAOs within the Marshall Islands. So, there's recognition of corporate personhood. So we're working through that, but it's again, still very early days. So I'm going to stop there. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but if there are questions, I want to make sure we can answer those.
I'll jump in with one. It almost sounds like this is like gig work on steroids.
Yep. Yeah, and I think as we kind of briefly mentioned, right? Kind of off the back of COVID, we've had a lot of people kind of shift to remote work, and a lot of people start preferring it. But then throughout that time as well, we've also seen kind of a huge emergence of the creator economy, right? Or the freelance or the gig works, right? Even if you just consider a little bit before that, working for Uber or doing kind of gig works like that. DAOs and crypto make a lot of sense for compensation, ownership structures, and gig work, but kind of much more in the software context, right? So if you're building some form of software, some kind of app, DAOs can basically function as gig work, but for those, right? So imagine if Twitter was entirely built off of freelancing and gig work, right? But where, and this is where kind of opposes something like Uber, those that are actually contributing to the software development of the application actually have ownership, governance, and control over the roadmap and how the protocol is being built out in the future.
Thank you. You guys, thank you both, Matt, Lucas, for joining us today. We're going to jump real quick. There are a few questions that I'll run past you, and maybe we'll get out to those askers. But I'm going to pass it on over. Thank you again for joining Sharpen the Saw today. It was awesome. You're welcome to stick around for second half here. I'm going to pass it on over to you, Peter.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Greatly appreciate it. And I've got 30 more questions. So I look forward to talking to you more about it. Our next speaker has an incredible past. He got into the radio business after college and was a DJ for Waxy Radio. Remember that radio station? He's
No.
got a long history in the concert business. He was John Shear's right-hand man and ran security for all the concerts. He's a big fan of oceans, warm water, diving, and photography.
Well, that's true, yeah.
His father was a Lutheran minister, which is where I think he got his attitude of helping needy causes wherever and whenever he can. They did a huge exclusive article on Chip in 50 Plus magazine. He's tech savvy. He's one of the most helpful and knowledgeable guys that I know. And he has helped needy charities, schools, and hospitals raise millions of dollars. Now, Chip, I know you're in quarantine at home right now with 3 very sick family members, so thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Folks, let me introduce Chip Saresky from The Corporate Communication. Chip, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So Peter and I go way back, actually to the days when I actually was, I was working with Peter to help his company. And one of the things that I did in that regard was to, actually, I got to share my screen, correct? Haven't done that yet. Bear with me 1 second. Share my screen. We were doing web commercials when I first met Peter, and I wanted to give an overview of him that he could distribute all over the world. And that was really where we became good friends. In any event, let me just touch a little bit about actually what he was just talking about is the way I was going to open. I wasn't sure he was going to be able to go into all that. So when I started my career, this is how I began. I was actually a DJ. I was trained broadcaster, but it didn't take long before I realized that this was not going to carry me through my career entirely. I had to find something for the next generation, and which is why I actually was concerned about everything that I was doing, and that included the concert business. I did work with a lot of bands, the biggest ones from the Stones on down, but things were changing. Were changing even the concert business. Napster and YouTube were way people introduced themselves instead of the radio and instead of touring. And so saw a lot of has-beens coming, and I was also getting a lot older, so I had to stop. So in essence, my story is the same as what a lot of nonprofits are in the midst of right now. Change is inevitable, and to remain viable, they need to embrace it and adapt it. So what I'm going to be talking a lot about in this particular presentation is not quite such the technical side of things, but it's how we can help small nonprofits in particular, or raise your level of engagement, possibly with helping them fund with new strategies so they can acquire more donors, they can retain more and increase the support for the mission of these nonprofits. I came to corporate communications roughly 20 years ago, and they are currently in a little past their 25th year of digital marketing. And I was really impressed with what I saw from them. And that was principally the reason I came over there. And during my period of time with them, we've won 16 Best of the Web Awards, and we've been written up quite a bit on different magazines. And the reason we have is because we've really fundamentally focused on helping companies really truly make a transformational change. And that's principally been on the web, and that's what most people deal with. So we try to develop more effective communications for our clients to communicate with their clients. We try to find a way to excite and engage people at a much higher level, because that gets them better conversions. And we develop communications that fit the lifestyle of today's clients. And so we've constantly been trying to push the limit and the edge of what we do. One of the things that we do, though, is we really try to help them get business functionality on the web, and ultimately change the way the clients are doing business. We helped Kodak. When I first arrived, they were fully engaged with Kodak. We built a website that was doing the Easy Share camera system with interactive product demos. We had 36,000 regular users, and these were from Comp USA and Best Buy, and they were translating in 7 different languages. We were really ahead of the curve, but it proved so successful that it moved them from the back of the pack to number 2 in camera sales in 18 months. We tracked user behavior for Gleason. Over 15 years ago, we joined and it started helping Gleason. And about 12 years ago, we came up with a My Gleason account, which was actually helping people track user data. And so once a person had logged in, we were tracking all their activities, but we were also emailing wherever that guy was from in the world and what he looked at. We emailed that to a salesperson in that region so he saw what they were looking at and got a tremendously warm lead. And then finally, in terms of our history, there's a design center in Medina, New York, that was a very small little architectural sign shop. They used to do Illustrator graphic mock-ups of signage for new buildings. And they found it a very frustrating method to have to deal with the client. We built them an interactive design center that actually creates all these things now in front of a client. But we did this over a decade ago. So our goal has always been to help clients actually communicate better with their clients. But how does that relate to fundraising? When you engage people better, you excite them more, you'll convert more, and that means money. And in this case, the general fund is no longer of interest to many donors, except for maybe the GoFundMe accounts. But really, donor designation gifts has increased significantly in the world that I typically deal with in a lot. Today's donors want to invest in things they believe in or they feel touched by. And that's why hospitals and universities oftentimes choose our particular kind of method to increase their donations amounts. The other reason that they've gone down that route is nonprofits have been relying very heavily on the top tier institutional donors. They usually represent about 80% of the money they raise, but that other 20% is a lot of people. And so by creating more gifts and cool interactive tools, you can actually support more gifts and more people and include more people in the gifting process. So more donors at a higher level and creating more gifts is what we actually pursue. The Golisano Children's Hospital was the one that really put us on the map. It was really our first big project of this nature. The virtual tour campaign raised $54 million, and its success was written up in the Chronicle of Philanthropy in the Results Matter section, which actually put us on the map and suddenly had hospitals and universities calling us from everywhere. I can show you that site real quick. This is what put it on the map. When people came to this site, they click on a floor, they saw an imaging floor, wanted to take a look at it. And when they clicked on it, all of a sudden they saw a kid's MRI machine that they could give $500,000 to. And to a lot of people, it brought things to life, especially a parent that had a child in the hospital, for example. So Grateful Patient was where they would go, and it would really make a difference. This really was changing things for the way people had been doing it all along. And so at that point, we actually were suddenly recognized for our work, and that was what the article was talking about. So I oftentimes show this to people, and I've shown them to websites that look similar in a lot of ways too. So when you look at the traditional method that people did, it was literally saying, you're $1 million or $500,000 donor, and would you mind contributing? And this was not successful anymore. It was just not turning the kind of numbers. When they came to this kind of approach and showed people what they would invest in, what they could put their name behind, suddenly it brought the gift really in sharp focus to them, and they could actually see them putting their name behind this. And many institutions are using this as a prelude to a donor wall. So the campaigns oftentimes are 5 years long. And so until they're all been selected, this is the way they virtually show them that they're in supporting of the institution. That's kind of how we got involved with RIT, and we're currently providing the interactive tour for the Shed. The Shed, when we were talking to the folks at RIT, Kate Bessinger and her team, the whole goal with that was to try to bring something that RIT would expect to see, which was something more interactive, something cool, something that would be consistent with what their student body would be looking for. So we did the Shed. And I oftentimes tell people, because from 2006 on, when I started working on MBA campaigns, by supporting the Saunders and the Shed, you will strengthen the value of your degree. So let's take a quick tour of the shed. This is a still that I put together. It actually is showing the size and scale of the project as you cursor over these images, but these floors are all interactive, and there's hundreds of GIFs in many campaigns like this. They don't have quite as many, but you couldn't have a list that would be compelling at all. And that's why oftentimes these don't yield anything like what we can help them do. In the case of this particular space, you would look at it and you'd scroll over and you'd see the Premier Maker space. You could see the atrium. It's $2 million gift. Peter, you got that, don't you?
Sure.
But anyway, you can see, they can visually see the campus expansion right in front of them. And many people are remote. If you're an older alum, you may not even be in town. So this is great for affecting snowbirds, that you can have them see the vision of the new campus. But anyway, so that's what we really spent our time in the recent past focusing on, and why we're actually doing quite well in that category. How does this relate to your nonprofit? Well, in a lot of ways, we got to find better ways to communicate. For nonprofits to remain viable, they have to adapt to an ever-changing donor landscape. The number of donors has decreased over the last 3 years. The number of dollars per donor has also decreased, but the overall donations are up. So what does that mean? That means that greater support from the mega donors. And that's in part because money is moving from the baby boomers to the next generation, and they're dumping money in a lot of instances. But that's not something you can rely on supporting. So unfortunately, all those nonprofits that are pursuing those top tier donors are creating donor fatigue. So the only way to get around that is to adapt new strategies for communicating in ways that fits the lifestyle of the new young and up and coming donors, increase the alternative streams of funding, engage marketing automation to track donor behavior, and leveraging the data to personalize the optimal communication to nurture more donors in needing, it's what's needed by many organizations. So increasing efforts by grant funding. It's a really underutilized tool. If you're involved with a non-for-profit, one of the things that if you were to ask, they probably don't get a tremendous amount of grant funds. Grant funds are generally underutilized by most agencies, but the industry-wide, it's a 64% grant application approval. So if they're not pursuing them, they're missing better than a 50-50 shot to get in the game. There's over 100,000 foundations and over 26 federal grant funding agencies you can tap into. There's a federal rule. They all have to distribute at least 5% of their funds. And with investments up, that means there's more money than there's been in the past to spread around. If you guys, as the MBA alum, you really probably could help them create a great grant writing process and a proposal, even just a boilerplate. If you were to help them assemble that, then the specifics of it could be nailed down for them, and they could probably increase their output of those overall submissions by a lot. And if they repeatedly submit them, even if they don't get them, the success rates on successive submissions is actually quite high. It's higher than the 64%. So positioning grants to utilize staff and volunteers and fulfillment will help give payroll relief, amongst other things. And researching those foundations is something the MBA grads could also do. There are IRS 990 filings. You can help them see who's spent the money, who hasn't, and who could be a good fit for them. But the big one that I think is really the hidden gem here is, what could you do if you had $120,000 in free digital ads? It's quite simple. It's a thing that most people could never budget, but Google Grants will give it to you. It's a 4-step process to apply. And if you can get that, you get 10,000 of digital ads per month. For many programs, they don't even budget. So it's a game changer. So if you're looking at how could you spend that money now, if you don't have it, you supplement it. You may even it could be your only budget, but if you supplement it, you can use that budget for things now that Google won't permit in their Google Grant program, because they do have specific rules. But if it provides you 10,000 in digital ads per month, you can get it every single month as long as you've got the click-through rates, which is critical. and those rates are required for you to get continued funding. So it could stop at any time, but if you're smart and you actually do a good job of it, you can actually get 10,000 per month for the year, which is why it'll help companies like many be viable. And companies like ours, for example, can help organizations for a small monthly fee, but that small monthly fee being offset by a $10,000 digital award per month is really oftentimes a great return on that investment with us. This marketing investment can be a game changer for your organization for awareness and support. And if you add marketing automation, which is, you mentioned Salesforce and HubSpot, there's another one that we use, which actually is much less expensive than those and offers an awful lot of it, but you can harness and exploit donor data, which is really kind of important. The future of fundraising is really all around the big data. I'm on the board at Consumer Credit Counseling Service, and that's one of the things that they're in the midst of, because they're really trying to take future success. And that's why they actually are leaders in the industry in their category. CCCS is actually led by two guys. They're Saunders grads, Jason Tracy and Christopher Camaleone. They both graduated not that long ago, but they're doing an excellent job. They're actually on the board of the National Federation because they've been doing such a good job with our size market. Marketing automation will help you truly understand your donor. It'll empower you to do better fundraising results and raise more money. It'll prepare your organization for the future if you're working with a not-for-profit, and providing powerful integrated marketing tools to help you build useful donor data for future targeting. Nonprofits, especially small ones, can benefit greatly by having the same level of integrated technologies and data access the corporate world has. Most of the small ones don't have any of that. They don't even have the staff, which is why folks like yourselves are such a huge asset to them. If you bring this insight, bring the tools to the forefront that they can really exploit the marketing that they can do. Marketing automation will help you see donor trends, their behaviors, help you build an optimal donor persona, which could be a recurring donor. What do they look like? That's the stuff that the marketing automation will collect, and it'll help you refine and personalize your communication to them to help unlock their generosity. You can build data on who is likely to give, how much they will give, and when they are likely to give for a timely communication, and what message did they respond best to. So those are the things marketing automation can truly do for you. It's what automation of those Google funds makes it great. Retargeting of the messaging, a chance to achieve great Google click rates. It's important because then you can continue it. The marketing automation tool will help you build the appropriate landing pages. It'll refine your email messaging, and it'll tailor the Google grant goals of, and these are the permissible ones, raising awareness of your mission. It'll also drive continued engagement. It'll drive and increase your donor base because you'll be able to distribute this to more people. And that accounts for bigger of the 20% and less reliance on those institutional donors. If you get them, great, but if you don't, you're really dead. Ultimately, increased donations for an increased donor base is what you're ultimately trying to do. There are affordable integrated marketing options. The one I mentioned is the one we use for the folks that we do with Google Grants. And the powerful tool that it is, it actually integrates all these different features and functions from email marketing. It actually has the database. It'll actually do retargeting of ads. It'll actually coordinate all your social. It'll give you bots, a CRM. It's all in one tool, which is why it's important to consider using something like this to help leverage the Google Grant money. So if you're interested in helping a not-for-profit, I worked on the Council of Agency Executives website. It is a not-for-profit that has 140 agencies in it. They are a good group because they collaborate with each other, but many of the smaller ones could certainly use executives like yourself to help support a mission that they are all struggling with funding. And so I talked to Melinda. She's suggested that if you wanted to take a look, the member listing of 140 of them is on their site on the public view side. and the links are all straight to those organizations. So if you want to look at somebody you might be interested in, just dump it into the contact form, mention that you saw it here, and she will actually help pair you up with them. So if that's something you're interested in, we certainly can help you through that website. That's pretty much it. I was trying to make sure I didn't overstep the time. I appreciate you including us today. If you have any questions about my stuff, this is my contact information. I'm at corporate communications normally. Right now I'm home because of all the sick people, but if you want to reach me, this is a great way to reach out, and I can answer any additional questions, because this was intended to really just kind of be an overview of top level strategies.
Chip, this was, yeah, Chip, this was really, really great. And the cost of what, 10,000 a month with Google is what an amazing opportunity for everybody. You know, and
Wow.
we've got in the EMBI alumni that we have here, we've got a lot that are members of nonprofit businesses, and a lot that will be. And I think one of the hardest things for non-for-profits, I sit on 4 boards, and the hardest thing to do is find money. And this was a great presentation. It really gave us ideas, and again reminded us of things that we may have known, like grant writing, et cetera, that we need to pay more attention to. So this, you covered a lot of bases. It was great, really good. And people should take advantage of it. And I just reach out to my fellow EMBA members and say, if you're not on the board of a non-for-profit, with the skills that you've got, that spectacular degree that you have, you really should be trying to do what you can to help a non-for-profit that is important to you.
That's really what I was trying to find a way to, back up the presenters before me, but this is really about the folks that are on the call right now, what they could do to help people in our community, the small ones in particular, which serve their own little niche, but they do struggle to survive. Even in the credit counseling world, those offices are being shut down in large numbers, and it's unfortunate because it can't survive because the funding streams from a lot of the institutional financial organizations has dried up, and so they're trying to find independent ways to survive. But there's a desperate need for people who are struggling with their finances, and yet they don't have the funding to do it. So Chad over at CCCS has ramped up his fundraising, and they went from literally a third of what they were doing last year to 3 times that this year. And it's a huge differential in what they're operating like right now.
Yeah.
Hey,
Chip, I know you go ahead, Krista.
I was just going to ask a question, because you had a statement in there, and I know it's kind of high level, but it'd be interesting to get some maybe further commentary on it. And you said that the future of fundraising is all around the data. And I just maybe talk a little bit about that, because I in my own experience being on a board, I feel like that is a gap.
Well, and so oftentimes, so there's software out there for larger agencies that can afford it, that can actually do really serious data mining of what kind of person came in. But even the lesser expensive, smaller marketing automation systems can still provide you with a life of that donor's activity, and you can see what they reacted to, what kind of messaging they saw. And so by instituting fields in that CRM, you can then filter out to the person who reacted to the reoccurring donor message, or, and so as you look at the information that's being pulled from that donor's activity, from your communication with them, you can start to shape personas, which is what I was referring to. And that's why the activity and the communication you have back and forth, and even reaching out to new ones, seeing what people are what appeals to them. And that's where the creative side comes. When it's comparing A/B messaging, and you can see this one perform better than the other, you can actually start to shape the optimal message to the optimal person, and hopefully get a better response and a gift. But data mining is, they actually have AI, and I'm actually in the midst of working on an AI project for CCCS, which is actually going to be having a person be able to put their information in on how much debt they're carrying and what the banks will probably provide them with, and then see if they're willing to get on a debt management program. But in terms of funding, you're still looking at really heavy duty software that can actually do a lot of that data mining. For larger not-for-profits, it's worth that investment. That's the future of where funding is going to be coming from. But the small people really need something accessible, low cost, and that's why that's one of the things that we work with. You know, because HubSpot and Salesforce is an expensive one. They're sometimes tough to integrate with. This one we've been working with is really actually quite streamlined, efficient, low cost. So it helps people getting in that data side of it, or at least targeting a better messaging to the specific people in your CRM.
Good to know.
So Chip, I'm going to say thanks for all you do for this community. You have raised and continue to raise millions and millions of dollars. You make a lot of lives better. So again, on behalf of everybody that got to listen to you today, I want to say thanks. Now, you said 2 million.
$1 million man.
All I have is $1 million. So I'll work on getting you the other $1 million.
So thanks a million. Well, it's always nice to see you. You know, I'm going to just tell a really quick side story with Peter's piece, and this is Peter's acumen that went to work. When I created an interactive overview of his company, no one had done this up until Peter. I had handed it off to him and I said, you can get this email link out to people and they can see a 2 or 3 minute overview of your company. So when I finished the piece, he loved the piece. And then he says, I'm going to use my Outlook and I'm going to dump all my contacts and say, hey, whoever gets me the most views on my overview piece will get $5,000. Manufacturers reps look for the pathway to the least amount of work to get the money. So they launched it, which is why doing good creative has always been exciting, especially with a guy like Peter, who enjoyed seeing his company in this new piece. And he really exploited it like I would have dreamed of. So that's why we've always been good friends. He appreciated the work and I loved what he did. So
you did a lot to help our business. You did another piece that we used that literally hit all 50 states and 30 countries. I mean, we were doing business in 9 countries. A lot of that had to do with the work you did. And again, thanks again for that. So let me let everybody know about what's going on tomorrow, Chip. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You changed lives today. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter.
So thanks for joining us today. And tomorrow is our final day. And for those who are joining us live tomorrow, we are live tomorrow at the newly remodeled EMBA classroom. We've got a great day set up for you with a lot of topics. And the other thing I want to remind you is that the Ukrainian pickup boxes, there are a bunch of Ukrainian supply pickup boxes throughout the college. So if you have anything you need to drop off, this would be a good place to drop it off, or drop it off with Interval. Interval, as we talked about, and she spoke to us on Monday, is sending out 42 skid loads of material this week. 42 skid loads. It's a huge amount. Thanks to you for helping. We're kicking off yes.
Someone's asking about the dress code for tomorrow.
Business casual to casual.
Thank you.
And we're kicking off the day tomorrow with lunch starting at 11:30. Write that down, 11:30. Dan Tassoni is going to be our first speaker. He's joining us at 12:45. Then we've got Jim Goff, who's the chairman of the board at Landsman Development, who's going to introduce Roland Williams, who's a Super Bowl star and motivational speaker. Dr. Munson will be speaking to us. Jackie Masral, our dean, will be speaking to us. We'll have a few folks from Saunders. And then finishing off the day tomorrow, we've got Dan Mason, who's the manager of the Red Wings. That'll be a great presentation. And then let me remind you, with the folks joining us tomorrow, dinner at Max's with some amazing wine from Fox Run. Scott, the owner, will actually be out pouring some of the wines and talking about it. Here's an important time. First cork of the wine pops at 5:30 tomorrow night. So don't be late. And remember, we've got a lot of great stuff going on tomorrow. I'll see you at 11:30 tomorrow morning. Thanks a lot. And thanks to everybody. We've had a tremendous amount of help getting all this set up. So thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow at 11:30. Cheers.